Hi, this is Sonia from An Enthusiastic Reader, and Happy New Year. I am here today to do my very last Friday reads of 2021. I had a really good final readings run of the last part of this year, so I thought I'd quickly go over some of the books that I read that I really enjoyed and one that I didn't enjoy quite as much. And so let's get started. The first book I want to talk about is called The Plot by Hanff Korelitz. And I have to say I was pretty disappointed in this book, probably because I knew about a third of the way through exactly what was going to happen. And then as I'm reading and reading, thinking that I know exactly what's going to happen, I'm waiting for a plot twist that will somehow skewer the plot of this novel, the plot of the story, so that it was a surprise at the end. But no, exactly what I thought was going to happen happened. And there was a huge kind of giveaway this third of the way through that pretty much told you where it was going. So I was really disappointed in it, actually. It was a good idea because it was about a writer who had had a little bit of success and then a couple of poorly received novels, and he was teaching in a very MFA program, low residency, and he had a student who was really kind of a jerk, but who divulged that he had the best plot for a novel ever and that he didn't really need any teaching help. He was just there to get some credentials so that he could, get very rich off of this plot that he had for the book. And then he divulges the plot to the writer. And then for various reasons, the writer decides to use that plot in his own book. And I won't give away any more from there. Sorry, the cat is moving this around. I won't give away any more from that point, but, just believe me when I say, if you read a lot of literary fiction, you're going to know exactly what's happening. So disappointed because it got quite high ratings and it just didn't work for me. Can't say that about any of the other books I want to talk about. So let's get to the good stuff. I read a book, a Renee Ballard police detective mystery called The Dark Hours by Michael Connelly. And he has written, I think, 4 books with the protagonist, Renee Ballard. She is a detective that has gotten off on the wrong foot in the LA Police Department and, in fact, has been banished to something called the late shift, where she just has to work overnights, whatever they need her for, in whatever cases she needs to work that happen in the middle of the night, she's there for it. She has also forged a tight friendship, mentorship with Harry Bosch, who has been in so many books written by Michael Connelly. But these are the Renee and Harry branch of the story. And I have to say this was the best one of the 4 I've read so far because it takes place actually it takes place in the end of 2020. So right after the election, it's kind of that winter Christmassy time, and then right after the first of the year. So we all remember what happened at the beginning of this year. The whole LA Police Department is completely demoralized, and in this particular iteration in this novel, they've kind of given up trying to solve cases. They're very unhappy from what happened over the summer with the George Floyd protests. And so they've kind of adopted this attitude of that they're not going to try very hard to solve cases. Renee, on the other hand, wants to solve cases. And so I'm not going to talk at all about the cases because that really doesn't matter as much, but it really reflected the gloom that we felt at the beginning of this year, how COVID affected the rank and file of the police department. And also, there were 2 pretty good crime stories that Renee was working on during the course of the story. I highly recommend this series if you just like very easy, quick reads. The audiobooks are fantastic. And I was just really enjoyed reading that one. The next novella I would like to talk about is called Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. She is an Irish writer. And this story takes place at Christmas time, but it's really not a Christmas story. It's a novel about 1985, small village in Ireland where they have a convent with a laundry at the top of the hill. And then the story is really about how this man who delivers fuel, he has a fuel business that he delivers fuel, various types of fuel to different institutions and businesses in the area. And he has a family of like 5 daughters. He's very, happy with his family, but he also has never felt at ease inside this community because his mother was a woman that had an illegitimate son, and he was illegitimate. And so his father was not in the picture at all. And yet somehow she managed to kind of escape the punishment that comes from the Catholic Church at this time for unwed mothers. And so he feels always a little bit out of the loop, and he discovers something that makes him make a moral choice. And so it's just like 110 pages. You can read it in one sitting. It's very atmospheric and it's very quiet. And, that's how I like my books. And I really just love the Irishness of the whole thing, and I can't recommend it enough. So looking for a novella that will make you really feel something by the end, I would suggest this one. It seems like I read this so long ago now, but it wasn't really that long ago. And I want to talk about Gilead by Marilynne Robinson. I read Housekeeping years and years ago, and I then read it for a class. I mean, I really love that novel. And so I never read Gilead, and I am so sorry that I waited so long to read it. Last year for Christmas, I got all 4 of the Gilead novels together, and I was just kind of putting it off. I don't know why, because I know so many people loved it, and I absolutely loved it. I read it very slowly and very carefully. I'm sure everyone knows what the premise of Gilead is. It's a minister in a town in Iowa, Gilead, Iowa. I think that's right. The town is named Gilead. And he has married a very young woman, a woman in her 30s. He's 80, and they have a young son together. And so he knows he is on the brink of dying and decides to write his son in the future a long letter talking about his life, how he got to be who he was and where he was. And most importantly, it's about his relationship with a man in the town who is, okay, the premise is he has a best friend who's also a minister, and that minister had a son named Jack. And so Jack is kind of the surrogate son of the main character. He is loved deeply. It was almost as if the best friend and his wife had a baby. I'm forgetting the protagonist's name. I'm so sorry about that, and I'm not going to go look it up. But because he lost a wife and daughter when they were young, he has been a bachelor ever since. He was a widower, and so he was lonely, and they wanted to kind of provide him with almost a surrogate son. And then that son does something pretty horrific. And where we are in the story is that son, Jack, has come back to town, and it's about this very ambivalent and strange relationship between the main character and Jack, and how he is reconciling his disappointment and resentment towards Jack for what happened in the past, but also trying to forge a future for everyone after he dies. And so it was tender, and it was whimsical at times, and I loved the voice. I just loved everything about this novel, and I can't wait to read the rest of the books in 2022. That's one of my reading goals for 2022, is to read the entire series. So if you have anything that you'd like to add about Gilead in the comments, I'd love to talk to somebody about it, because it really meant something to me. A novel that I read that was released in 2021 is called Edge Case by Y.Z. Chin. And this is the story of a Malaysian couple. They have come to the United States to work in tech, and it means so much to them that they were able to leave where they came from and come to the United States to work. However, it's during the Trump years, and so their presence and their ability to stay in the country is just like hanging on by a thread because of the way that immigration has changed in the country after the Trump presidency began. And so the premise is the woman, whose name is Edwina, works for a tech startup company that is trying to create an artificial intelligence joke generator. And the engineers who are working on the program aren't really taking a lot of care with where they're gathering materials for jokes that come into this algorithm. And so she is trying to explain to them in various ways that some of these jokes are extremely harmful and belittling to people who might not just be the kind of 20-something white male personality. And she's given a lot of pushback from them. And in the meantime, her father-in-law dies. They go back to Malaysia for the funeral. And as they're coming back to the United States, her husband's personality completely changes. And at the very beginning of the novel, he leaves her and she's not at all prepared for this. She really loves him. And the story goes from there, her trying to figure out why his personality changed, how they can stay here in the United States with their tentative visas. Everything's very on the edge. And that's kind of where the title of the book comes from. But really enjoyed this. It was kind of written to be funny, but it was also written to be very sad. And I really feel like I got to know Edwina and the lengths that she will go to try and figure out what's going on with her husband and his personality change. And so it's not a very long novel. And I think if you're interested at all in artificial intelligence, if you read Clara and the Sun, if you like that kind of how is technology impinging itself upon us in very unexpected and terrible ways, and where are our politics going and those kinds of things. And it's kind of hard to see back to 2017 when this took place, before our whole world got turned upside down. I don't know how it would look at this point, but it was a novel that I really engaged with and I would recommend. I did a buddy read with Sean, the book maniac, and we read Country Girl, the memoir of Edna O'Brien, and this was just delightful. The very first segment of Country Girl kind of recounts some of the stories that happened in the novels that also happened to Edna herself. And so you can see how the trilogy of novels called The Country Girls was really taken right out of her early life and her early marriage. So, but what happened to her in real life was even worse than what happened in the novels, in terms of her estrangement with her husband, who was completely jealous of her and controlling of their children and the custody of the children. So I truly enjoyed this memoir, because it goes beyond just the first part of her life and then into, as she is finally divorced from this man and they finally come to some kind of tentative peace, she becomes a celebrity because of the novels that she wrote. She's basically cast out of Ireland because of the way she wrote about premarital sex and all kinds of things that the Catholic Church did not approve of. So she moves to Britain, and she's kind of despised and loved in Ireland, but she makes friends with so many very famous people. She has lots of writer friends, actors, all kinds of people, and she has some very strong love affairs with people, married people and celebrities. And she's not bragging about it, but it's just very matter of fact that during that particular time in the 1970s in Britain, it was a time for that kind of bohemian lifestyle and experimenting with drugs, LSD. And then as she gets older, what happens to her. And she had a deep friendship with Jackie Kennedy, and doesn't really talk too much about it, but it's interesting to know where her love of literature and other writers and how that fortified her in her life. And just really enjoyed it. I'm so glad I read it, and Sean was great to read with, as you know. So that was great. And the last book I want to talk about is Memoirs of a Catholic Girlhood by Mary McCarthy. I was on an Irish roll of literature. What drew me to wanting to read this memoir is that I found out that Mary McCarthy's parents both died very young from the 1918 flu. And they had a very happy life together, as I think there were 4 or 5 children. And they loved their parents, and their parents had totally broken away from their families and had a very bohemian bohemian lifestyle as well. And then they just suddenly died of the flu. They were, and Mary remembers this train journey. They were going to visit. They were riding in a train when everyone got the flu on the train. And by the time they got to their destination, their parents were dead and the kids were all sick, including Mary herself. And so there was a period of time where she didn't know her parents were dead, and she was in this fever dream. And they went to her very wealthy grandparents' house, and her grandparents then, instead of raising these children themselves, did not really want to be bothered. So they got an aunt who was like in middle age and had just married this other man. They didn't know that much about the man, and then put these two strangers in charge of raising the children. They bought them a house in the neighborhood, but the grandparents really didn't want much at all to do with these kids. And so this couple, who had never been parents before and were actually awful people, really abused and terrorized these children for a period of years before the other grandfather, the Protestant grandfather on the other side of the country, found out about it. And then he broke up the whole situation and got Mary to come live with them and the boys to go to boarding school, and her life went off from there. So it was a terrible thing that happened, but she quickly got over it as she moved in with her grandparents and continued to go to Catholic school, even though her grandparents were Protestant. You got to know more and more about the grandparents. You really learn a lot about the grandmother at the very end, who she gets her own chapter, and what an interesting woman she was. And she was Jewish, but she didn't practice, and she kind of suppressed it so that she could be married to this Protestant man. And but she never felt like she was part of the community because of her Judaism. So anyway, there were a lot of layers to it. I'm so glad I read it. I think I'd like to read an actual biography of Mary McCarthy so I could learn more about her influence in terms of her literary career and criticism and her politics. But it was really interesting, and it was a great way to end my reading life in 2021. Right now I'm reading Karl Ove Knausgaard's book called Bright Morning Star, which is kind of terrifying and uncanny and weird about something that happens to the earth with the emergence of this unknown star and how it affects the people who saw it. So I'm only about 20% in, really loving it. And so that's how I will end out 2021. I do plan to do a couple videos about my plans for 2022 and maybe start trying to catch up on a few of the tags that I've seen that I think I would be good at and I would have good answers for. So I do have plans to keep making videos. I know I have not been particularly consistent, but this is the year where consistency is, I guess, just not as important as just everybody taking care of themselves. And that's what I'm trying to do. So I have more to say, and thank you for watching this. If you got all the way to the end, I hope you have a very happy new year, and I will see you very soon. Bye.